It doesn't get any more important than this. It's the Week 15 Fantasy Football Playoff Start and Sit Show on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. And we're finally back. Sorry that it's a little bit late this week. I finally got on StreamYard to hopefully start recording my voice. So we get a show right before all of the Sunday games this week on an all-important Week 15. Fantasy playoffs are here. And look, hopefully you've got the bye week, but you're listening. So I'm guessing that you need some start-sit advice. So let's get straight into it. But first, please make sure you send me any questions in the comments below or on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also check out my rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com and my articles at football.razzball.com. And it would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube as well. We will start things off, as we always do, with the quarterbacks. And realistically, you got any of those top five guys, you are starting them. Brock Purdy, real dud at number 6 this week. That game with the rain just ruined everybody. Really disappointing if you had somebody in that game. I really like Tua this week. I think against Houston, he could go off. He's been very good the last few weeks. They've been needing to throw the ball, and I do think that Houston will be able to move it enough that this will be a relatively high-scoring game. So Tua is one of my favorite streamers for this week. I think Kyler's an okay option. Sam Darnold gets that tough matchup against Chicago, but we saw how good he was last week. I think he might struggle relatively this week, but I still think he is a reasonably good start. And Justin Herbert against Tampa, that's a great matchup. You do want your quarterback taking on Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay have conceded the most points to quarterbacks so far this season. Now, slightly below that, Bo Nix against Indy. I had him high early on, but there's talk of a little bit of rain in this game. Coming off their bye week, I don't know if they change it up and start going a little bit run heavier against Indy. It's kind of hard to see. So a little bit nervous about Nix this week. That's why he moves down a little bit. Patrick Mahomes gets Cleveland. Again, a lot of rain potentially in that game. Forecast is still a bit up and down, but we are talking gusty winds, possibly some rain during some or all of the game, and that will affect his ability to throw at least to some extent and just to generally move the ball downfield. Jared Goff gets that Buffalo matchup, but I still think there'll be plenty of points in that. The Lions are still the favorites. Stroud, solid option against Miami, and Love against Seattle is kind of the last guy I feel okay about. Winston in that rain game, considering moving him down, I might move him as far as 18. I think Baker's got a chance of being okay. And there is also rain in that Richardson against Denver game as well. Everyone else below that is simply a super flex option. If you're looking at the Vegas guys and you have Aiden O'Connell or hoping to start him, please make sure you pick up Desmond Ridder because that's a Tuesday game and he's the only guy you're going to be able to switch him out for. Running backs, Derrick Henry should feed against the Giants. He's a 16.5-point favorite, the Ravens. So I expect a lot of running, a lot of scoring. Henry should be very good. Barkley is always a solid option. I do think they'll struggle to move the ball against the Steelers, whose defense is just so good at the moment. But if they're going to move it in some way, it'll probably be on the ground and with check down. So I do think Barkley will be the guy. I love Chuba Hubbard against the Cowboys. They've got no real viable backup. Probably Mike Boone is the number 2. He's nothing special. So I do like Hubbard against the Cowboys is a fantastic start. Joe Mixon, you start every week. Same with Bijan. Josh Jacobs against Seattle is a solid option. Chase Brown, I like as well against Tennessee. Achane in that tough matchup against Houston, but I expect a lot of check down, so that's where that volume is going to come from. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, who's at 16 against Buffalo. You can run on Buffalo. I do think it feels more like a Gibbs game, but Montgomery's still a solid start as well. And we're seeing James Conner started to take back over from Trey Benson, who'd started to take 5 to 10 touches each game. I think even against the Patriots, Conner's going to have a busy game. Dowdle gets a fantastic matchup against Carolina. They've conceded the most points to running backs and incidentally tight ends so far this season. So Dowdle's a solid option. Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker doubtful takes on the Packers. I do think against the Packers he is going to be okay. I think you'll get plenty of checkdowns, but there are better options out there. Brian Robinson is back, as we know, coming out of his bye week against the Saints. You can definitely run on the Saints, so that's a good matchup. I've got Kamara a bit further down. It is hard to run on Washington. We're seeing a lot more Kendra Miller being used. We're not seeing Kamara being used in the red zone, even without Taysom Hill. So that's why Kamara is down further than he normally would be. Taylor gets that tough Denver matchup. I just struggle to see them being able to score well. I think he'll get plenty of volume and he's a solid option, but I don't know. It is just hard to move the ball on Denver at the moment, although if you're going to do it on the ground, is a viable option. Turner Pollard against the Bengals. I really don't see the Tennessee having a great game here. I know you can pass the ball on the Bengals. It's really hard to run on them. I don't know what this game's going to look like, and that makes me nervous. Jones against the Bears. I think I probably move the ball on the ground there. That's why he's relatively high up to relative to where he normally is. Stevenson against Arizona. Same thing. You move the ball on the ground against the Cardinals. Pacheco in that potential rain game against the Browns goes higher for that reason. James Cook, hard to run the ball on Detroit, but they do still find a way to use him with checkdowns and things like that. So you can't just not start him at all, but he is further down than usual. Najee Harris against Philly, really hard to move the ball on Philly, but there's not really any other viable options lower than him. Breece Hall probably plays, and if so, against Jacksonville, I feel like he gets kind of moderate usage. That's why he's lower than usual. It is possible he just pops off because Jacksonville is a very good matchup for running backs. I believe they've conceded the second most points this season to running backs, so that does make him a valid option, but it's hard to feel particularly good about him. DeAndre Swift with Roschon Johnson out. Look, it's a bad matchup against Minnesota, and that's the reason he's lower than he normally would be. So, I don't know. I feel okay about him, but he's not someone I'm going out of my way to start because the Vikings have conceded the third fewest points to running backs this season. Rashad White is sharing with Bucky Irving against the Chargers. Not easy to run on the Chargers. They've conceded the sixth most points this season to running backs, and I don't think Irving's fully healthy, which is why White is higher than him. Tracy against the Ravens. The Ravens, you cannot run on the Ravens at all. They have conceded bottom 10 points, the eighth fewest points, in fact, to running backs, and I feel like the Giants are just going to generally struggle the whole time. Tank Bigsby took over from ETN as the running back for the Jaguars last week. So he is the guy to start against the Jets. Jets was formerly someone you could definitely run on last season, but this season they've conceded the 11th fewest points against running backs. They've just generally been all around good defensively. So hard to feel great about Irving, especially when he's splitting with Travis Etienne. But for that reason, Etienne's lower in PPR. Etienne moves up and Bigsby moves down. Sincere McCormick's on a lot of people's lips, but we don't know what his usage is going to look like, and that makes him really risky, especially against the Falcons. The Falcons, very hard to run on. Seventh fewest points to running backs so far this season. So even though he's higher than the other guys, I don't know, I think you still see a little bit of Alexander Madison and a little bit of Amir Abdullah. At least there's no Zamir White, but hard to feel great about McCormick unless they're ahead, and I think they're probably not going to be ahead. They are certainly underdogs in that game, so that makes it really hard to feel good about them. 5.5 point underdogs, I just checked, indeed, so that's pretty bad. Warren, another desperation option. Same thing with Isaiah Davis. All these like bit part plays, you're just hoping they have a big game. And I'm just generally avoiding the Denver and Cleveland guys. I might move the Cleveland guys up a little bit because of the rain. At least they're going to get more touches that way, but it's hard to see them that increasing the amount of scores they get. So that kind of lowers their ceiling a little bit as well. Wide receivers, and look, Jamar Chase, even though there's a little bit of rain and wind in this game and it's against Tennessee, he's still my number one. And T. Higgins still number 8. There's been a lot of talk about squeaky wheel game for T. Higgins. So got to start both of those guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown against Buffalo. Tend to filter everything to the middle of the field. So I can't imagine a situation where Amon-Ra has a big game. He's had probably 3 disappointing games in a row, but he was really good before that. So don't give up on him too quickly. That can happen in strings of games. I do think St. Brown's a solid option this week. In fact, he's a good option this week, realistically. Jefferson and Collins get tough matchups, but they're starts. You still absolutely must start them. Tyreek Hill gets a good matchup against Houston. Consider moving up as high as 4, in fact. I do think this is a good matchup for him, but just the floor is very low in that whole situation in Miami at the moment. Mike Evans, you got to start him. He's always got so much touchdown upside. AJ Brown gets that really tough Steelers matchup, but I just can't not start AJ Brown. I know it's risky. I know you might be tempted to start other guys, but Brown has such a high ceiling. The way they use him, if they decide that he's going to be the guy this week, he gets a bit of a squeaky wheel game. All of a sudden, he is going to be very busy. And Drake London, always massive touchdown upside. The Raiders have been struggling a bit. They do get some of their players back in their secondary. Nate Hobbs, for example. I do think that's going to help them a little bit, but I don't know. I still like Drake London this week. Lamb, okay matchup against Carolina. I think there's a possibility of points because they are actually the underdogs, the favorites. The Cowboys. Amazingly, the Panthers 2.5-point favorites. First time they've been favorites since 2 years ago or something like that. So absolutely crazy. Cortland Sutton's been just unbelievable since that donut in week 7. Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson get great matchups against Jacksonville. Terry McLaurin, good matchup against New Orleans. He should be involved, but there's always a risk with him that he struggles for whatever reason. JSN has been so good. It's a tough matchup against the Packers. They're so good against the slot, but how do you not start him? DK Metcalf, on the other hand, has been poor the last 3 weeks, but he gets the better of those matchups. So I do find it really tough there, but I think the JSN is just the number one now. We just have to accept that. Weird and a bit surprising, I guess. I mean, I know he was the first wide receiver picked in his draft class, but still a little bit surprising given what we've seen from DK in particular. Lab McConkey, solid option, especially in PPR. Takes on the Bucks. Malik Neighbors, low touchdown upside, but Baltimore concedes so many wide receiver points, second most on the season. So, look, it's hard not to start someone playing against them. It's really only the Vikings that concede more, and it's not by a lot. So, Neighbors is someone I'm okay with starting. And DJ Moore is the guy that takes on the Vikings. We saw him get over 100 yards last time these two teams played. He's another solid option, but I've still got Judy and Ridley ahead of him, despite the risks they come with. Judy plays in that rain game against KC. You can certainly pass on KC at the moment. On the season, they've conceded the 15th most wide receiver points, but it's even higher than that. They're 8th overall in the last 6 weeks. If you go to the Rasball website, they have the slot versus wide analysis, and it tells you how they've been going in the last 6 weeks. And the Chiefs have been giving away a lot of points. So I do think that Judy has a chance for that reason, even if it rains and has some wind there. Calvin Ridley, struggling to score recently, but the Bengals are a good matchup, which is why I've still got him relatively high. 12th most points to wide receivers. Zay Flowers, I mean, they're scoring upside, but are they going to need to throw on the Giants? Are they going to want to throw on the Giants? That's the real question mark here. The Giants have conceded the 7th fewest points to wide receivers this season. So I have to do the maths every time I look those numbers up because they're in the inverse for the against points. But look, I don't feel great about Flowers, but he's ultimately the wide receiver one in their team. So it is possible, but it's just as possible we see Tylan Wallace or Nelson Aguilar pop up with a touchdown. Brian Thomas in that really tough Jets matchup, hard to feel really great about him. Jacoby Myers, the number one guy against the 3rd most points conceding team. And the Falcons, I've considered moving him up and jumping him over Thomas and maybe even Flowers because I do feel like it's a solid matchup. The problem is, hard to know what will happen with Desmond Ridder instead of Aiden O'Connell. So unless we hear something about quarterbacks, I'm not moving him any higher. Khalil Shakir gets Detroit. That is a good matchup for a wide receiver. Not as good as it used to be, but it is still a top 10 matchup on the season. Jalen Waddle, I've got way higher than usual because he takes on Houston. He's starting to get more touches now. Houston have conceded the 4th most points to wide receivers and definitely will concede it both in the slot and out wide. Jordan Addison has been very good of late, but gets a really tough matchup, which is why he's lower than he possibly could be. Darnell Mooney, similar situation against the Raiders. I don't really know how that's going to look, so that's why he's a little bit lower. Marvin Harrison Jr. should be a good matchup, but he's struggled the last few weeks, so I can't have him any high because of that. Adam Thielen's been an absolute roller coaster ride. Do you want to start him in the fantasy playoffs? I do. I'll take the risk. There's always possibility of 10 targets and 100 yards. And maybe even a touchdown with Thielen, but he might do absolutely nothing. So PPR in particular, I'm taking the risk, but it's up to you if you want to join me on that ride. Jamison Williams gets that tough Buffalo matchup, but I still think he's got a chance of being okay. Josh Downs, not 100% sure he's healthy. Tough matchup against Denver, so he's in there. Michael Pittman Jr. again, also hard to start against Denver. Jaden Reed is a lot further back than usual. Because he's just been struggling the last few weeks. Seattle's not exactly the greatest matchup. He only plays 11 personnel snaps. They're not really feeding him the ball anymore. A lot's going to Christian Watson, but now he's going to lose snaps to Dontavian Wicks as well. I'm guessing now that Romeo Dobbs is back, Wicks starts getting a whole lot more snaps, and all of a sudden can't trust Watson or Wicks, and you still can't trust Reed or Dobbs. So it's a total mess. Watson has upside, but really hard to trust him this week. I need to see a week with Dobbs playing before I'm willing to start him. Roma Dunze gets the good matchup, but can he make the most of it? He has been struggling for upside of late. Nick Westbrook-Akina, you basically need a touchdown. You're looking for a touchdown, especially in a non-PPR league. NWI is the guy. Guys like Johnston, Worthy, Leggett, heaps of risk there. So hard to feel good about any of those guys. But they're desperation starts if you're in a deeper league and you need somebody for those playoffs. Tight end rankings, and Brock Bowers is my number one guy. I think against Atlanta, he could feed no matter which quarterback is playing. We know that the Falcons concede a lot of points to wide receivers, but that's essentially how Bowers plays. DJ Turner getting injured did lead to a lot more two tight end sets with the backup Michael Mayer playing a lot last week. And a lot of the ball went to Michael Mayer because it was a situation where you go to the traditional tight end. In a situation where it goes to the wide receiver, Bowers is going to get a lot of the ball. So I do think that Bowers probably is more productive this week than Mayer. Trey McBride, got to start him. Travis Kelce, you might not want to, but you got to start him even in the rain. Janu Smith, a lot of risk there, but against a team you can definitely pass against in Houston, I feel like you have to start him. Even though Houston generally concedes points to the wide receivers and not the tight ends, they've conceded the fourth most points to wide receivers and the fourth fewest points to tight ends this season, but you still got to start Janu Smith. Hawkinson, back to normal snaps. I think he should be fine this week against Chicago. Again, Chicago's very good at shutting down the wide receivers, but they conceded the 12th most points to tight ends. Might even move Hawkinson above Smith. I'll have to think about that one. Sam Laporta gets that Buffalo matchup. Not the greatest matchup, but he's got so much scoring upside, even though the Bills have conceded the 5th fewest points to tight ends. Tucker Kraft gets Seattle. He's just... every week he just has some upside there because he scores so often and makes big plays so often. So he's someone you can start, but it is a little bit of a risk. Mark Andrews, it's really tough in games that they're leading. Andrews doesn't tend to be good, but who else are you going to start? And you'll regret it if he has another one of those solid games. So I think you still have to start Andrews. Ertz against New Orleans, it's very mess. So is Hunter Henry. It's just hard to feel good about those guys, but they're getting so many targets at the moment, you kind of have to use them. And Jake Ferguson gets the Panthers, who, as I said earlier, has conceded the most points to tight ends so far this season. So you kind of got to start Ferguson, I think, if you are desperate and don't have any of those top guys. Kate Otten, Pat Frymuth, all okay options in trickier matchups. Juwan Johnson with Taysom Hill gone is a viable option. And some streamers, Stone Smart comes in for Will Disley. We've seen what Disley can do recently, and Smart is a great receiver. It's just not as good a blocker. So I do think that we'll see Stone Smart be solid, but he's not going to play that same amount of snaps as a Disley. Jordan Akins comes in for David Njoku in that rain game. The rain's probably going to ease that back for me. Kyle Pitts is barely startable now. Ideally, you go for somebody else. And Noah Gray, big risk, but has been scoring touchdowns and getting 4 targets a week. So that's always an option. Brendan Strange also in there for Evan Ingram, who is out as well. And that's all we've got for the Start Sit show for week 15. Good luck in your fantasy football playoffs. Sorry again that the video is late this week. I'll be back to my normal schedule next week. Obviously, I was coaching volleyball nationals all week, which has certainly limited my ability to do much this week and to get everything fixed up in time. Plus, the recording not working really did not help either. But it's all working again now. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And so we should be good for next week. As always, even if the videos aren't up, you can always message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with Noah, and I'll answer all your questions. Or pop in the comments below. ffdfantasyfootball.com is where my rankings are. And of course, you can see my articles at football.razzball.com. Plus, it'd be great if you can like and subscribe for all the rest of the season content and a heap of awesome off-season and NFL draft content coming up as well. Look forward to seeing you guys next week, hopefully when you're in the playoff semifinals. But until then, enjoy another week of football.